now we're going to take a look at the English attack against the Scheveningen, excuse me. We kind of already looked at it in the Najdorf because it transposes a lot, but it's slightly different oftentimes in the Scheveningen. And we'll see that it's a different setup for both sides than in the Dragon because you have not fianchetted your bishop, and it actually leads to like a more solid position for black with slightly fewer attacking chances. So let's just take a look at that and see what may come out of it and what you need to watch out for. Okay, so normal moves. And notice they don't play their bishop out this time. Their white bishop, they leave it at home. They're not going to go into the Fischer-Sozin line. They're not going to play against f7. They want to play with the English attack setup. And this is pretty much what I always play when I'm white against the Sicilian, because I've played so many games and analyzed it so deeply with the Yugoslav attack and the English attack. Basically, the formation that we see with the bishop on e3, and then the queen on d2, and then the queen side or the king side pawn storm by white. It's very effective against all forms of the Sicilian. And when you played thousands of games and looked at tons of variations, you get really, really good at it. So I kind of figure, well, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. And I play it almost exclusively. Although if I see the Najdorf, now I play the Adams attack. And the Adams attack just gets you a really good position almost no matter what. And so actually, the Adams attack is making it so some people are avoiding playing the Najdorf, and then they play the Scheveningen instead. But if you play the Scheveningen, now you've got to worry about the Keres attack and other things like that. So there's always a constant battle between the choice of openings between yourself and your opponent. And the person with the deepest knowledge will usually have an advantage in the game. Okay, so we see the regular Scheveningen moves. We don't play a6 yet. We take all of our time to get the center set up and get a solid foundation. And by not fianchetting our bishop like in the Dragon, we have a slightly more solid defense. And even though it will seem like white's attack comes quickly with the pawns coming down, we can also get ours rolling pretty fast depending on the move order. So a typical thing is white, if they're a good player, they'll usually move their king over and improve that position. It's worth taking a move to do this. And if you look at lots of Grandmasters games, they almost always do it, as I explained before, because in some positions, if we trade off this knight for the queen on a5, this knight can't move without the queens being forced to trade off. And if the king's there, it's a trade with check, and the knight doesn't have this nice in-between move that we learned before, where they can get a piece, in this case, with a check. And so it just benefits them to move their king over. So they do take a move to do that. It also gives us a little more time. We'll now play a6, so none of these pieces can come over here, and we can start our pawns rolling. So typically they'll play g4, although as I've told you before, they can play h4 first instead. It just depends on the move order that you like. h4 is slightly faster, and it puts the pressure. They can just push this pawn down and immediately try to get the king opened up, but it's a little bit easier to defend. But if they play g4 first, they're going to have a stronger pawn storm, and it's going to be slightly slower. So again, we see that everything in chess, when you do something that gains you one thing, you give something else. h4 gains you speed, but it gives up maybe a little bit of effectiveness. g4 is a little slower, but you're going to have a stronger attack once you do get to the king. So it's a matter of preference and what you choose to play at that particular time. So here, we can play b5, typical maneuver. It looks like their pawns are coming down pretty fast, but we're not worried about their pawn making our knight move. We'll put that knight into a nice defensive position, and we'll worry about expanding on the queen side. If we just freak out and worry about what our opponents do, and we see ghosts with every move, then we're going to move prematurely, and we're going to be letting them have their way with us. And we don't want to be worried about every little thing. We want to calculate and see that there's no danger yet. Also, they haven't moved this light squared bishop yet. They're going to have to take a move to move that bishop. They haven't connected their rooks. So by moving really quickly to do the pawn storm, they're slightly underdeveloped, whereas our development is really good. A little trick here, if we want to, is we can just trade off this knight. It makes sense for us oftentimes as black to do this. As I said in a different lecture, it doesn't make any sense for white to trade because this knight is slightly stronger than ours. It's in a better central position. It's already moved twice. And by taking this and letting them trade and put that bishop there, now we can move our queen either to c7, or we can put our queen on a5 if we want to, and again, threaten to trade queens and go into an endgame with a really good structure and try to win it that way. They can also leave this knight here, not trade queens, in which case we can continue by pushing our pawns. We have our bishop aimed at their king as well, and we have a pretty good attack coming ourselves. Or if we want to be a little more conservative, we simply put the queen on c7 across from this c2 pawn, and maybe we line up some rooks there. And what that does is it makes it so either the rook has to stay home and defend, or this queen has to be very careful where they move to. Otherwise, if a couple of their pieces move when they're trying to attack us, we can hit them here on h7. So we always want to have threats, right? If they move this knight, make this knight move, basically we have only one place to go, but it's a place that defends. So it's not a bad place for a knight to be defending this pawn. We just leave it there, and it will take him time to get his pawns down. He wants to keep the pawn storm going. Okay, well now we can start ours. Now we knock his knight off. He kind of blocks that bishop in a little bit. And now our pawn storm is coming quickly as well, only our queen's in a slightly better position actually. They have taken the time to move these pawns down, but they haven't gotten all their pieces ready. So this is a good example of how you want to make sure that you coordinate all of your pieces in attack. Otherwise, even if they get their pawns on here, it's not necessarily going to do anything. So there's lots of ways that this game can play out now. We can't look at every single variation, but needless to say, you can tell that both sides have a good game, have a good attack, and you just have to decide what the best moves are. It might make sense for white to move this knight forward somewhere. Can't go here, right, because he'll lose a piece to this fork. So you always got to be careful about that when you move your knight a couple squares over from your bishop if there's a pawn going on. So he has to move it, maybe move his knight here, and then maybe later move his bishop out to here. That might be a couple moves that he can do to prepare for the attack. It's probably premature for him to just go ahead and go like this and attack our king, in which case we can do a couple things. We can just ignore it, let him take, and leave that pawn there as a blockade. We can go here and stop it, in which case if he takes like that, it's looking a little bit dangerous now. We have to worry a little bit about some of this stuff. Yeah, that's not good. So we got to calculate all of our moves. Like when he puts a pawn here, we got to calculate all those different variations. What happens if he goes here? What happens if he goes here? What happens if we take it with this one? In general, we don't want to open our king. So whatever closes the king best is going to be the move that we're going to want to make. We probably don't want to take it immediately because then this is really ugly. And later on, he can attack this and he can move his queen over. Really dangerous. So you want to do whatever you can to keep your king closed, okay, and defend. Okay, we might even do something like go like this with a knight and just ignore that pawn. If he trades off the bishop, that's good. That'll put our bishop in a really good square, aimed at their king and defending this. And now, if he takes that pawn, we can just take it with the knight. And even though he's going to continue attacking, now we can look to make some trades. We might even go like this, block that bishop out, and look to maybe even do something like this. Play f5 and attack the center. Remember, in chess, we have to be following a plan and know the opening, but we also have to be flexible. So whereas normally the Sicilian, we will be attacking on the queen side, if our opponent allows us to defend well by not having all their pieces ready. See, notice that these pieces are not doing anything, this knight and this bishop, because we knock them back with our moves and they attack prematurely. Often we'll get a position like this where we'll have a nice counterattack. And if he makes a mistake and trades off, now all of a sudden our pieces are way more active and black has a better game here. Now, if he doesn't take this pawn, we also have the threat of playing f4 and gaining space and knocking his bishop back. So this is a really good example of how, again, white attacked prematurely and we end up with a better game. If they don't attack prematurely, well, then we just have more time to move our pieces. So let's say we do the same thing. We go here without him playing that move. Instead, maybe he does something like he puts his bishop here. Maybe now we push his pawn forward, he moves the knight back, but now his pieces are more coordinated. Just by taking one more move to move that bishop out, now he's got both of his rook behind his pawn, and we can do the same thing. We can have a similar attack as him, and now it's going to be more effective for him to play this move because he has time. And we can do the same thing, and he'll want to be patient. It's almost always better to be patient and build up a really good attack before touching the king, because if your opponent can just trade everything off, you may not have accomplished anything. And we're going to want to attack ourselves, open the position up, and this is going to be a race. It's going to be a race to see who's got a better attack, who has the best moves, and it'll be interesting. You know, who knows? I'm just showing how the pieces move. This is going to be really, really complicated. And at this point, you're going to want to calculate a lot and make sure that with every pawn exchange, you're not getting the worst end of it. So this is where calculation comes into play. The opening, usually, it's all about knowing the moves, knowing the patterns and themes and what you're trying to get. And then once you get into the middle game, you're going to want to slow down and calculate. And even if you're playing like a 10-minute blitz game, that's another reason why you want to know the openings so well. So that later on in the game, when you get to some sort of position like this, you can stop and use up, a couple minutes on one move, because that one or two moves, whatever happens next, is going to be maybe the deciding factor between winning and losing. So you want to calculate a lot, and that's part of managing the clock. Obviously, it's harder to manage the clock in a blitz game if you're only playing 10 minutes. So you want to be really economical, and you want to make quick moves when you know that they're probably best, which is why we're studying openings. And then you want to take your time when it gets complicated. It's the same thing when you're playing longer games. You want to conserve your time during the opening, and then at key points in the game, you might take, like if you're playing like a 30-minute game, you might take 10 whole minutes. That's 1/3 of the game on just one critical move. If the calculation is really, really important, you'll stop and make sure that you make a really strong move at that point. Otherwise, the game could be lost, and that one move might be what wins you the game. And so this is something that really strong players do. They know how to manage the clock, and it's really important. Sometimes it's okay to get in time trouble at the end if you made really, really strong moves and you used your time to find the best moves. A lot of really strong players, they're getting time trouble a lot. They get down to the point where the time's running low, but they've got a really good position. And it's better to lose on time than it is to make some bad move and some blunder, some huge mistake because you were worried about the clock. So that's just another thing to think about in terms of time management, and it's yet another reason why you need to be really good in the openings.